According to an online database, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania includes at least 190 institutions of higher education. That means the state has some 665,000 college and graduate students, and they are the very folks least likely to have identification under the state's new laws. And therefore, they may not be able to vote. They are also overwhelmingly likely to support President Obama. And in 2008, President Obama won 18 to 29-year-olds in Pennsylvania 65% to Senator McCain's 35%. Now, I want to know, do these young people have any idea what is going on? To answer this question, I sent a young person to find out. Our very own NBC page, Kristen Bucaria, a 2012 graduate of Bucknell University. She went back to her old stomping grounds in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
Can you tell me about the voter ID laws?
I can't because I don't really know much about them.
I know there's this new change going on.
I do know about the new having like the date on the ID, but I didn't know if it actually passed.
Basically, students have to have an expiration date on their IDs.
Okay.
So this is Brock's, not Barack, Brock. Brock's student ID. Can I see your ID? Do you have it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's right here.
The thing that matters is there's no expiration date on it. There's no expiration date on it.
Okay, so I need an expiration date?
You need an expiration date on it in order to vote. That's part of the new voter ID laws.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
We're living here, we're 18, we should be able to vote.
I think it just makes it harder, or it makes it less convenient to vote, so it's like, oh, I'm not going to go through that trouble.
I just think it's a hassle because students might not know about getting that extra sticker or being able to go over those steps.
This new voter ID law has never been around before in Pennsylvania. What do you think the purpose of it is?
To detract a large population from being able to vote, and a lot of kids will not know exactly what is going on when they go to try and vote.
Pennsylvania could be swayed by the number of students who are in here that might
and the number of people who don't have a license at all.
The poorer population also might not have an ID. For example, a driver's license.
Right.
Not everyone has a driver's license. There's public transportation that everyone can take.
People who are really into it and who really want to vote, they're going to find a way to vote.
I think it's a smart idea. I mean, you don't want people just coming up and randomly voting.
Honestly, personally, I don't think my vote matters.
People have died for hundreds of years giving us a right to vote, freedom and stuff like that. So if people are trying to take that away, that's absolutely un-American.
And now, Kristen, the NBC page, joins us. Kristen, that was great reporting, but honestly, I'm a little freaked out. Are there any college students in Pennsylvania who are going to be able to vote?
Hi, Melissa. The more proactive ones will be able to, but the frightening thing is that for most college students, their school ID is their main form of identification. In 2008, when I was a freshman, I was able to vote with just my student ID, and now that won't be the case. The Pennsylvania Public Interest Research Group found that 115 schools in the state provide student IDs without expiration dates, which means they don't satisfy the new voting requirements.
Okay, so if universities are providing IDs without the needed expiration date, is there anything that the universities can do about this?
Well, Bucknell, my alma mater, for example, will provide students with expiration date stickers for their IDs that comply with the new law. But what I found when I went there for you is that many students don't even really want to go through the trouble of figuring out how to get that sticker. And, some of them are undecided whether or not they're even going to vote. So it's just an added hassle to them and a hurdle.
Kristen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to go down to Pennsylvania for us. And stay tuned, because I'm going to be sending you out on assignment again. When we come back, we are moving beyond Pennsylvania because the efforts to rig the vote are underway in multiple battleground states. Stay with us.
I'm on the road again. I ain't got no woman just to call my special friend.
Remember last week when we told you about those small voting rights victories in places like Texas and Florida and Ohio? Not so fast. Late last week, a federal judge in Ohio ruled against the state's elimination of early voting the weekend leading up to the election. Then this week, the Republican Secretary of State, John Husted, said he's just not going to comply with the court's order because it would, quote, only serve to confuse voters. Then the same judge who reinstated the weekend voting ordered Husted to appear in court this coming Thursday. Husted then backed down, issued a formal apology to the court, But that's not the end of it. Now, Ohio's Attorney General, Republican Mike DeWine, says he will appeal the judge's ruling and once again try to eliminate early voting the weekend ahead of the election. Folks, this battle is apparently going to continue. Ohio is doing this differently. This is not a voter ID issue in Ohio. What's going on in Ohio?
So Ohio, just like Florida, eliminated the weekend voting, which is early voting. Right before the election, you can go and vote. We know that in places like in Ohio, 56% of the early votes that were cast in a place, Cuyahoga County, where Cleveland is, were African American. We know that in both Ohio and Florida, this is where you had the Souls to the Polls programs, where African American churches went down to the polls after church and voted in unity. Well, here we have a state that's two states that have decided we have to cut off early voting opportunities. But Ohio decides to be recalcitrant, right? The Secretary of State's like, I'm not listening to that court. Obama for America actually filed that case, and they didn't want to listen to it. So the judge pulled them up.
So I want to play a little bit of history here because so we've got Ohio. Ohio's having the battle around early voting. We've got Pennsylvania with the ID. I want to listen for a moment to Congressman John Lewis, who spoke about what it took to get voting rights in this country. And it's such a powerful moment from the DNC when he was talking with MSNBC's own Andrea Mitchell. Let's take a listen.
I would never forget the three young men in Mississippi, Andy Goodman, Micah Sherner, white, James Chaney, African American. They died by trying to encourage other people to become registered. And it will be an affront to what they died for and to all those people that struggle for us to allow people to keep people today from registering and for voting.
All right, now I want to set that against a new ad that the state of Pennsylvania is playing about getting your voter ID. Here we have John Lewis saying it would be an affront to our history as Americans to require this. But here's what Pennsylvania is saying about the requirements to get a proper ID.
If you care about this election.
If you care about this election. If you have an opinion.
If you want a voice. If you want a voice.
If you want to make a difference.
If you want to vote, then show it.
Show it.
Show it.
If you care about this country, it's time to show it.
So if you care about the country, pay your poll tax, like go get your voter ID.
That's what it is.
Those two versions of like, to be a good American, we should make voting easy versus if to be a good American, basically, jump over the hurdles. Is that what we're looking at here? A battle about that fundamental meaning?
I think there's two things going on. One is that our elections really should be free, fair, and accessible, right? But we have a really underlying discussion going on in this country about whether or not voting really is a right or a privilege. And we're going to have that conversation. Most people would believe that this is a right. It's fundamental to our democracy.
Yeah, Kenji.
And not only that it's a right, but it's a right that's preservative of all other rights. The Supreme Court has told us this, because if you don't have a right to vote, then you're actually not part of the polity. People don't have to engage with you. They don't have to persuade you, because you're basically outside of the conversation. You're outside of the polity. I oftentimes bring up on the first day of constitutional law, why is it that we hold such fealty towards the Constitution that was created by white, property, male, dead people.
Right.
And
but we love it nonetheless. Yeah.
Exactly. And oftentimes the answer is because the notion of all these status-based exclusions to we the people was kind of confronted and overcome. So 4 of the 27 amendments to our Constitution expand the franchise. So the 15th Amendment on the basis of race, the 19th Amendment on the basis of gender, the 24th Amendment on the basis of wealth, no poll tax, the 26th Amendment on the basis of age. And so we have this gradually expanding electorate. So I'm with John Lewis. I mean, to say that, all of these hard-won victories, which were bought with blood and immeasurable suffering, right, would suddenly be turned back, even chipped away at in this around the edges with these voter ID laws is really a travesty.
And Mickey, I wanted you to, Pennsylvania was saying, show it. If you care about the country, show it. So you showed me something amazing during the break.
Well, what I showed you, I still have my congressional ID card, and it doesn't have an expiration date, even though I'm no longer in Congress.
Right.
And so yeah, I could walk into a polling place and show that I'm a member of the United States Congress, and that would not be enough to get me, in those cases, the right to vote. But, you know, this is not just about the immediate legislation.
Right.
We've always made it hard for people in the working class to be able to vote. We've had this system where, for the most part, in most states, the polls closed at 7. You had to vote near your home. You had to vote on a weekday, a work day. Well, you know, for a lot of people, you can't just walk off from your office and say, I'm going to go vote.
Right.
And it made it very difficult for people who worked in factories 20 miles from their home or whatever to participate.
Right, or if
so it's a bigger problem.
Right, and if you're working shift work, and particularly in an economy when folks don't have, I'm going to let you in on it, and I've also got, you know, Kenji, I bring you to the table to talk me through the constitutional law of it all. So when we come back, I want to know, is this going to the Supreme Court? And if it does, what does that mean? Stay with us.
A long time coming, but I know a change gonna come.
Think about this statistic reported by Ari Berman of The Nation magazine. 8 of 11 states from the former Confederacy have passed restrictive voting laws since the 2010 election. Now, we told you last week about a federal court blocking the Texas voter ID. And while it won't affect the 2012 election, it is likely that the state will appeal. Closing arguments involving South Carolina's voter ID law begin later this month. And with all the legal challenges surrounding voting rules in so many different states, it's hard to see how this issue doesn't eventually land before the John Roberts Supreme Court. And when that's the topic, we turn to Kenji. So, Kenji, two things here. Obviously, we're talking about Pennsylvania and Ohio. Neither one of those states are under the pre-clearance rules of the Voting Rights Act, but Texas is, South Carolina is. Explain to me the different courts in which these things are going to be challenged.
Absolutely. So just to take a step back for your viewers, what we're talking about is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And under that Voting Rights Act, which is still in effect, under Section 5 of that act, there are certain states that have had such a negative history of restricting the franchise on the basis of race that they have to engage in pre-clearance before they make any change to their election law. So Texas and South Carolina are 2 of them, right? And the reason that this isn't an issue in, say, Ohio or Pennsylvania is that those 2 states are not pre-clearance states. So the Voting Rights Act does not control those states.
They were free states during slavery. They were states that were part of the Union. They didn't have a Jim Crow history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Voting Rights Act is a huge boon for voters in states like Texas or in South Carolina or any other covered jurisdiction because it basically places the onus on the state rather than on the disenfranchised individual or potentially disenfranchised individual to make their case. And so what's been happening in Ohio and Pennsylvania is that the court has been saying, oh, well, we're going to weigh this, you know, and basically we're going to look at the potential for voter fraud and then we're going to look at the burden on potentially disenfranchised voters. The Voting Rights Act says because of this negative history that this particular state has had, the thumb is heavily on the scale against the state and for the plaintiff, right? Yeah. So what's happening now is a lot of these states are complaining and saying this is, the Voting Rights Act itself is unconstitutional. And that challenge, we don't need to wait, Melissa, for either Texas or South Carolina, because there are cases that are actually going to go up to the court this very upcoming term. So Supreme Court terms are like academic years. So the 2012-2013 term is a term in which the Supreme Court could consider a challenge to Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
So there is some possibility that the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which helps to protect folks and make voting possible.
That pre-clearance provision could be struck down. So not the Voting Rights Act in its entirety, but that pre-clearance section. And in fact, in a 2009 case called the Namudno case, Chief Justice John Roberts there's an 8-1, this came up before the court, in an 8-1 decision, the court sort of took a bye and they found a little loophole in the statute that allowed it not to address squarely the constitutional question. Yep. But the constitutional question is, does Congress even have the power to enact Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act? And that question could be squarely presented before the court as early as this term.
Yeah, and a court that has generally been on the side of not thinking of the federal government as having
and it's power. Because these states are saying we don't discriminate any longer. That was a long time ago. So this is unconstitutional as applied to us now. And so we're going to see that happening, but we have to understand the right wing has been setting this up for a long time to have Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act struck down.
Yeah, and we are not done with this issue. That's why we're calling it This Week in in voter suppression because every week there is something new. Kenji, thank you for joining us at the table. The rest are back for more. And up next, we're on the eve of the 9/11 anniversary, and I want to ask about how we view the word terrorism.